In.
Now. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Just give us 1 second.
It's volume, you gotta turn off.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us during this webinar, and thank you to our panelists and for everyone for joining and being so flexible with their time and enthusiasm for this webinar, given some of the rapid changes. We're really thankful for all of you for coming in this morning and for staying safe during this uncertain time. Just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Apta Garg. I'm one of the co-coordinators for the MenCare campaign. The MenCare campaign is a global fatherhood campaign currently active in over 56 countries around the world. And we are really excited today to have a number of different moderators and panelists who will present some of the ongoing advocacy work that the MenCare campaign will be taking on in the next coming years. So I'm going to pass it on to our moderators, Angelica Pino and Gary Barker.
Good morning and afternoon to everyone who's online, and thrilled to have our panelists join us. As Apta said, we know this is not how we had planned it. We had planned to do this live and in person in New York at CSW, but we all know what happened there. Before I hand over to Angelica, I'm thrilled that Promundo and Sonke and partners are able to co-chair this. Just wanted to give a few words of introduction. As Promundo and Sonke have created MenCare in 2011, we've had a number of conversations where the issue of getting men to do equal caregiving, folks often scratch their head and say, well, that's not really that important of an issue, is it? In the global gender equality debate and around issues of climate impact, and now we have coronavirus. We continue to affirm this is at the heart of gender inequality. This is at the heart of the gender binary. Women's inequality and unequal burden that women face every single day continues to drive so many of the issues that we care about from a perspective of gender justice. We launched, as many of you know, last year in June, the third ever State of the World's Fathers Report. And I think it's important to say that while it deliberately has lovely pictures of men and children and a film that goes with it, and we do want men to feel good about their roles as caregivers and connected to those we love, it is also ultimately about taking on the gender binary. We know from our data and others that women continue to do 3.3 times the amount of daily hands-on care work. We know that there's been no country in the world that's achieved equality on that, just as there's no country that's been able to achieve equality in women's income and participation in the paid workplace, let alone in political life. Those things go together. We also know that globally, if women were paid even minimum wage for the unpaid care work they do, that would be $11 trillion a year. There is no other poverty alleviation scheme that we've come up with on the planet that would reduce poverty so much as acknowledging the financial worth of women's unpaid care. We think it's often that that conversation then turns to, well, what are men doing? Why aren't men doing more of it? And somehow that it's just stuck in the heads of individual men that we're not doing our part. Our research has been really clear about the fact that many men, if we talk about at least the care of young children, many men do want to do their part. It is the things around men that hold them back. The structures, the systems, the norms they face in their family and the workplace every day that holds them back from it. We're going to talk some around parental leave as one of the mechanisms, but we know even that is very limited. About half of the world's countries have leave policies, most of those less than 3 weeks. And even our global champion countries of Iceland and Sweden, men are only using about 1/3 of the available paid leave. So clearly something else is happening than just individual men's choices. We're going to talk about some policy levers. We think social protection policies, poverty alleviation programs can be one way. We've done some analysis of those, and we can offer some suggestions there as well. We know that social norms are part of it. And we know ultimately that care work in general is undervalued and underpaid. And I think that takes us back to the core social justice issue that it is. And I think it is important to mention this moment that we're in around coronavirus, because it points out again, whether we look at the elderly who have died in elder care homes in Washington State in the US, the appalling support that we offer for paid care workers, let alone for unpaid care. Coronavirus and who is cleaning up and who is caring for those who are affected is ultimately mostly women. So whatever issue we're talking about, climate change and its impact on women, the coronavirus epidemic that may become a pandemic that we're looking at the moment, care work, paid and unpaid, continues to be underlooked and undervalued. So I don't think that somehow coronavirus is diverting us. Coronavirus is also showing how we must pay attention to unpaid care and paid care work and the gender equality there. I want to stop there. We'll have some more conclusions that we'll come back to. And with that, I'm thrilled to hand it over to Angelica Pino, our partner from Sonke, who have been co-leaders with us in this conversation around engaging men to fully do 50% of the unpaid care work. Angelica, over to you.
Thank you so much, Gary. I'm really very, very pleased to be in this webinar. As Gary said, and Napta said, we were supposed to be in person in New York, but reality check and some other things prohibit us from being there. But really pleased to have so many people participating. We saw the interest at short notice, so very happy to have you here. All the participants all over the world, I hope. Welcome to this. And I just wanted to tell you a bit about Sonke's role. We have been very pleased to be co-founders and co-coordinators with Promundo of the MenCare Global Fatherhood campaign. We first launched it in Soweto, a very significant place in the history of South Africa, of course. Soweto 2011, with the Minister of Social Development at the time. It was an amazing, very successful launch. And since then, in South Africa and in the rest of the continent, we have been such a welcome to this campaign. From Fathers Group in Botswana, from starting the Fathers Day in Uganda, to new parental leave provisions in South Africa, a lot has happened in these years. So we have been a bit of we have had the honor to be, like my colleague Bessel said, skilled birth assistance to the many projects across the continent that are really following the MenCare. And I want to also kind of pay the sort of tribute to my colleague Bessel here, van den Berg, who participates on behalf of Sonke in the Global MenCare Coordination, because he has been really the force behind this. So I want to acknowledge the role of the men at Sonke too in this. So that's what Sonke has been doing, and I just would like now to invite our panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we are going to go to the Q&A session. Sorry, to the presentation session. So first, can we start with Katja, maybe?
Yes, my name is Katja Iversen. I'm the president CEO of the wonderful, if you ask me, advocacy organization Women Deliver. We work for gender equality and the health and rights of girls and women, and work across the globe with all the people in power who we can nudge to make change happen.
Super. We can continue maybe now with Fidel.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name's Fidel Rutaisire. I'm coming from Rwanda. I'm the executive director of the Rwanda Men's Resource Center, known as RWAMREC, which is a local NGO working with men and boys to prevent violence against women and to promote gender equality through the promotion of masculinity in Rwanda. So we have been dismantling patriarchy with working with fathers in Rwanda and the Great Lakes region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fidel. Yeva?
Hello, everyone. I'm Yeva Vakyan, and I am the Associate Vice President for Gender Equality at Save the Children US.
Thank you so much. Tanjina?
Hello, everyone. I'm Tanjina Mirza. I'm the interim co-CEO of Plan International Canada. We are a child rights organization with a major focus on girls and young women, especially adolescent girls all over the world. Thank you for having us here.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Mar.
On
María
mute.
José Moreno. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
No?
now you're good. No, now you're good.
Yes, and I am the director for gender justice at Oxfam. Our mission is to fight poverty and injustice, and patriarchy and gender inequality is at the core of what we do. We are working in reinforcing it, both in the organization with feminist principles and in our programs and research. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so without further ado, we can move now to the presentations. Gary, over to you.
Great, thank you. And again, welcome to all of our panelists. I get the pleasure of starting off and asking Katya. Katya, first of all, to acknowledge Women Deliver has done amazing work in the past years of building bridges with key donors, the UN, key corporate partners, of really keeping front and center how much we need to do to achieve full equality for women and girls. We are thrilled that you have also seen the importance of men's participation in care work and unpaid care as part of that. Would love to hear from you how you've used your position to bring noise to this, what led you to want to do this, and we of course have the very, what's the right word to use? We've got the very clear objective of trying to get countries to sign on to this very lofty goal that men can actually do half of the hands-on care work. And how can we do that? Would love your comments and thoughts on this. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Angelica. Thank you all. And also to everybody who's listening in. You could be anywhere else, but you are with us here. That brings me a lot of joy and comfort, and I'm honored to be here. So why do I use and why do we in Women Deliver use our voice and position to champion the involvement of men and boys? Well, we do it because it's fair, it's smart, and it's right. We know from data in Women Deliver that a gender equal world, it's healthier, it's wealthier, it's more productive, it's more peaceful. But we also know that it's not a woman's issue or a woman's problem. It's a societal issue. It's an economic issue. It's everybody's issue. And that means everybody needs to be involved. So if we want to see that gender equal world, boys and men, women in all their diversity, all have a very strong role to play. And as Gary pointed out, evidence shows that men who contribute more equally and take more of that unpaid care work at home, well, they tend to be happier. The families tend to be happier. The families enjoy a higher income in general. Women have more career possibilities, and it's better for men and boys and girls and women, children, parents. So my team doesn't really like me to say this, but evidence also shows that that when men are more involved at home, intimacy also gets better. So it is a win-win, double win. And as the State of the World's Fathers show us, most men, 85%, actually want to be more involved at home. And there's enough to do. And that's kind of what the pledge that we'll talk about a little later, that I'll talk about a little later, also shows some of the things that we need to do to get to that 50-50. But let me just start by highlighting paternity leave, because paternity leave has shown to be a long-term game changer. It is effective in changing negative gender norms. When men take paternity leave, it shows that caregiving is everybody's business. It shows that they care. And it also is good, again, for the men, for the women, for the children. It is one of those gender norms ball busters. It is one of the things that can change negative stereotypes in the long run. But fewer than half of the world's countries offer paid paternity leave. And when it is available, it's mostly less than 3 weeks, sometimes only a few days. And even then, many men, most men, actually don't take it because of the stigma that's related to it or that's connected to it, and in terms of traditional gender roles. And that just doesn't only hurt the men, but also the families and the gender gap. But we're seeing a lot of change, and it's going really fast when it comes to parental and paternity leave. We have clocked some big wins over the last, just half year. And then the uptake in paternity leave in private sector and governments in both the global north and the global south have been profound. So together with Promundo and Unilever, Unilever's MenCare, Unilever and the MenCare Alliance, Promundo has established the paternity leave corporate task force. From Women Deliver side, we're really happy to be in that task force, joined with kind of UNICEF and Deloitte and Facebook and Twitter and Bank of America and even more coming of the big corporates, really to push corporate companies to do more to get paternity leave available for men. It's a great initiative. We share the good practices, we show what can be done, we raise the awareness, and we encourage more companies to get on board. And it's really amazing what can happen in a short while. This is less than a year ago this was launched. We saw business leaders in Denmark, the business community, the big umbrella organization, have joined forces there and are now kind of championing a two-month minimum protected paternity leave. We saw the European Union put forward a directive that will make 2-month paternity leave available to all parents. And in South Africa, as Angelica also mentioned, the President and Parliament has worked together with the NGOs on a new package expanding that. Just a month ago, Sonny from Unilever, Gary and I had a big op-ed, just a couple of weeks ago, op-ed that really championed it, and we also saw that go viral and get a lot of attention across the globe. So we took it up from Women Deliver side at the G7, both the unpaid care work, but also the parental and particularly paternity leave in the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Council to President Macron in 2019, where we got together inspiring laws from across the globe that can inspire more action on gender equality. The message to government is ditch the discriminatory laws and put in the progressive ones. And we had both the unpaid care work, what governments can do. We had the paternity leave, and we showcased some of the laws from Norway, from Finland, that champion this as well. So, but legally protected paternity leave is just one necessary step. We have to kind of the prevalent notion that care work, that caring for the family and achieving gender equality is a woman's work. We have to challenge that. We have to discharge that. So, and that is, as I said, the joint lift, the societal issue, and includes men and boys. So it's a big task, but we're up for it, even if it takes cultural and norm change. So we have put out at the Women Deliver conference last year, Promundo, and we supported, of course, from Women Deliver sides and helped champion it, using our voice, using our stand, using our advocacy to really kind of push the MenCare pledge. I don't know if you can see it here. And we asked men to spend 50 minutes more on care work. That would get us closer to 50-50 and to that 50-50 split between partners. But what we really do is to ask everybody here to push governments, because we really need some things in place that can enable this. And if I just run through a couple of the issues that really needs to be pushed, it's a fully equally paid, non-transferable parental leave for all parents. And it's a supplement to maternity leave. So we got the paternity leave, but it's not an alternative, it's both. And it's state-supported childcare, high-quality childcare. It's policies in the health sectors that encourage men in prenatal visits, childbirth, postnatal care, etc. It's a comprehensive communication campaign and school-based approaches. We gotta start young. And it is the regular data, disaggregated data that we have it on time so we can use it to get the right policies, programs, etc. And really measure the unpaid care, treasure and monetize it. So, you know, we're encouraging everybody to join the 50-50 pledge. We're asking everybody here, if you come from civil society, use your voice, use your connections to push it. If you come from a government, we say sign on to it and start working on it if you don't already. We don't need only the already convinced, we need the people where the countries as well, where it really, where the disparity is big, but the potential is greater. So we encourage that. I can understand if you know, if people need arguments and the data and all of that. From Women Deliver side, we also together with Promundo and Unilever Domain, we just produced an infographic. It has the light version of all the arguments, all the data, all the recommendations and asks. It's online, you can find it on womendeliver.org. That's the argument. We really hope that you will go out and champion this with us, because as we say, men care and women deliver. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katja. I think the most important thing I can say is what she said. That is it. The platform, the getting governments to sign on, we're going to be insistent and persistent in continuing to move ahead on this, and really deep appreciation for how you've brought your voice to that, the number of platforms that you've invited us to join voices, but really want to acknowledge just the space and the importance of your voice and Women's Deliver's voice in this space. And I think keeping centered on this is women-led, we are following the lead of the women who started the conversation of we can't achieve equality without equality and redistributing unpaid care work. So really thank you for that leadership and calling out the very specifics. Now I'm thrilled to turn over to Angelica to continue our debate, and we'll come back to some of the recommendations, Katja, that you made coming out of the MenCare 50-50 commitment. So Angelica, over to you.
Thanks so much, Gary. Thanks, Kathy. And first of all, thanks for the recognition of the women's movement and, you know, women economists and all that who have been talking about the care economy for a long time too. So thanks for that. Now we're going to move a bit to also to programs that have been there. And, you know, we have a lot. Civil society is very creative all over the world, and we have already developed programs. There are very interesting things happening, and that's what we're going to hear now. And the first one is going to be our colleague from Rwanda, Fidel Rutagisire. And for the people who have been lucky to have been in Rwanda watching what they do there, their work is amazing. So we are really very fortunate to have him today. So I want to invite Fidel to tell us what is Rwanda doing to engage fathers and to promote full involvement in equitable, non-violent and caregiving behavior in Rwanda, and also how is it they have managed to get the support from the government, which is another angle of the work in Rwanda. Over to you, Fidel. I think Fidel is in mute. Fidel? Hello, Fidel?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Yes. I was saying that in Rwanda, our point is working with fathers. We have been working with fathers through our program known as Hope. Bandebereho is a Kinyarwanda word, which means role model. And the program is a gender transformative intervention for couples to promote men's engagement in the productive maternal health, caregiving, and healthcare couples relations. So we have been engaging fathers through small group educations, and small group sessions of critical reflection and dialogue. So in groups, we put men together, especially fathers who are parents or parents of children under 5, and they go through 17 sessions, 17 gender transformative sessions.
I think we have lost Fidel, unfortunately. I think his connection is not very good. Fidel, are you there? No, I think we have lost him.
Angelica, why don't we continue with the next panelist also?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
And see if
I agree with you. Yeah. Then we will. Yeah. When I hope he can fix his connection. He was connecting well when we were testing, so let's hope he can reconnect. But yeah. So now moving to the experience of a very important organization internationally. You all know Plan International, very, very well known international NGO working in the field of children's rights. So we would like to ask Tanzina Mirza, the co-CEO, in all the work they have been doing to engage men in the promotion of gender equality or positive masculinities, in your experience, what have been the most difficult attitudes, behavior, and norms to change, and how have you tried to confront these challenges? We know social norms change takes a long time, it's difficult. What have you done at Plan to change this? Over to you, Tanzina.
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, let me thank you all for inviting us, and I'm thrilled to be here. And we have been working with Promundo for quite a few years now, so thank you, Promundo, for bringing us into this journey with you, and we have learned significantly from you and continue to learn from all those who are present in this panel as well. So yes, Plan has been working with the men, and especially young men and boys, for quite a long time, and this has become almost our basic component of gender transformative approaches, which aims to tackle the root causes of inequality and address unequal relations. So while doing this program very systematically, we have been working with boys and men and partner, whether they're current partner, future partner, siblings, households, community influencers. So we have worked with a range of people. As Plan International, we work on various programmatic sectors such as health, sexual reproductive health and rights, girls' education, economic empowerment, and income generation. These existing programs actually have provided an easy entry point to start talking about male engagement, men engagement, and to tackle certain attitudes and behaviors with these groups. So as a gender transformative programming, the entry of male engagement has not been difficult. So for example, if you have we have a maternal newborn child health program, we are encouraging the husband or the father to accompany his spouse to the health facility, or to help her get more rest during pregnancy, be non-violent, and and even actually assist them with chores at home. So this transition was not that difficult. But what is interesting to note is in almost all of these programs, men saw their role as helping their spouse. It was not to have an equal responsibility or to share the workload. It was helping their spouse or their partner or their child to do the chores. And another interesting point is most of the men saw this as a time bound. So when the wife was pregnant, they were more appreciative of the care, or when the mother is breastfeeding, the father or the spouse was more willing to help with the chores. So it was seen as a time-bound kind of support. Again, I'm using the word support. The trickiest part of this is the trickiest part of the engagement. The attitudinal behavior shift towards equal distribution and productive, reproductive, and voluntary labor between men and women. If it's short term, yes, but when it becomes a long term, attitudinal shift, that's where we are seeing the difficulties. And the reasons that we are seeing across in many of these countries where we are implementing the male engagement program, the three main points that were cited were stigma against men, time constraints, and interestingly, the woman or the partner herself not welcoming that change. But of course, these are very deep-seated, entrenched gender norms. They have deep roots in the gender role in the family, in the society. Any kind of change requires long-term commitment, and a commitment from both men and women, as well as community influencers, religious leaders, elders in the community. So it's not like a short-term, something happened and then you go back to your existing role of not doing much unpaid care work at home. So what did we do? So your question was, what do we do to affect these changes? So I'll give you some examples of the work that we have been doing across the world. So we are just finishing implementing fairly large program on maternal newborn child health in Bangladesh, Ghana, Haiti, Nigeria, and Senegal. Over 15,000 men were involved, and fathers clubs were developed. These fathers and men went through a 20-week-long training. Actually, Promundo, thanks to Promundo a lot, it was their curriculum, fathers club's curriculum, that we utilized and helped implement them. It's basically to enable fathers to adopt more gender-responsive behaviors and attitude around care. So following that, last year, Plan conducted a qualitative study in all of these countries to understand why is it men only felt they're going to be helping, but not actually sharing the workload or the responsibilities. Across all the countries, it was very apparent these Fathers Club and the men's involvement brought more harmony. And I think Katya mentioned about intimacy, as well as families being more cohesive, have a harmony in there. There was less gender violence at home. The caring and love was more, and not just with the spouses, but also with their daughters and sons. But what was so interesting in the study was the men who joined these fathers clubs experienced significant stigma from other men in their community, like a ridicule and from the neighbors, from the extended family, their friends and peers. So men themselves started criticizing those men who were coming into the fathers clubs. And especially the community influencers or community leaders were not very supportive of this. And this was seen as a big barrier in changing men's role. So Plan did a lot of work with engaging influencers, community leaders, elders, religious leaders, to demonstrate that these kind of behavior change is not just for men. It's helping the partner, it's helping the family, and in the long run, it's helping the community members. And that there needs to be a joint effort to fight the stigma. This is a broader social norm change, and it requires much more broader systemic issues. This whole male engagement or the lack of male involvement in unpaid care or paid care at home has deep and entrenched patriarchal gender norms. And it alone at the community level, you can bring about some change, and we are seeing some change, but to have this into a sustainable approach where it will continue longer, we need support at different other levels, such as level at policy level, at the government level, and I think Gary also mentioned, and so did Katia. So that remains a very important component. I'm not diminishing the work at the community level because it can't be one or the other. Having policies and government procedures or documentation is one step, but to make those policies or those change implement at the household level, community level, the work plan does, and many other organizations right now in the panel who do that work needs to continue. So it cannot be one or the other, it has to go in tandem. And and our 4 or 5 years of these programs have shown that change is possible, but it requires sustained effort. So I'll stop there and look forward to having more questions on this topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tanjina. And I think you mentioned something that is kind of the same in Africa, you know, the same in Latin America, where there is resistance also from women sometimes, but also you call the ridiculing from other men. I think we have experienced the same in the spaces where we work at Sonke. So it's something that we need to really work more on how to break this. Thank you so much for that. And then we are going to move to Yeva Avakian from Save the Children. And I think what we want to hear from them is, Save as an organization, you are very large too, and with thousands of staff all over the world. So could you tell us a bit, Yeva, about how you have prioritized the issue of men and caregiving for your staff in your organization, and how also you are doing advocacy? Tanjina talked about we cannot just do, you know, the work in the community, we need more policy. So what is also the experience of SAVE in promoting, you know, more policy and the lessons you have learned on men and care with other organizations? So over to you, Yeva.
Great, thank you, Angelica. First of all, I think, thank you for the invitation. It's really great to be surrounded by a fantastic group of gender equality advocates. Save the Children turned 100 years old last year. And one of the most inspiring things for me has been learning about how it was founded. And in 1919, a woman called Eglantine Jebb, a suffragist, a human rights activist, was arrested on Trafalgar Square for advocating for a simple idea that all children have rights. And 100 years later, we have been really reflecting on her legacy, on the feminist action that founded this organization, and thinking about how do we take this legacy forth into the next 100 years of change. Fathers and men's equitable engagement in caregiving has been a really critical part of Save the Children program models, both from gender equality and child rights perspective. My colleagues in Sweden, Save Sweden, sit on the steering committee for MenCare. And so we've been really engaged in that and have prioritized this, father sharing care work as important, both in terms of gender equality, as well as children's rights to care, an argument that is underpinned in the Convention of the Rights of Children. And so like my colleagues here, we have seen the negative consequences of gender inequality, rigid norms that very narrowly define men's roles, from the impact on their partners in terms of unequal labor divide, levels of intimate partner violence, as well as the tremendous impact on children. Men not being satisfied with the relationship they have with their children, nor having the emotional bonds that they often see their mothers have with the kids. We've also seen the remarkable benefits that men and women embrace when men and women embrace more egalitarian views and engage equally in the home, from the decrease in the use of violence to protection of children from abuse. And simply put, that's something that makes children and adults happier and live more fulfilling lives. So in the past couple of years, as we have worked to reimagine our vision for gender equality and building on the work that we have done to end gender-based violence, promote more positive, diverse forms of masculinity, as well as the efforts to empower women and girls globally that Save the Children has been working on. We worked on developing a gender strategy, adopting this inside-out approach, recognizing that meaningful change will only come if we transform from within. Conversation about gender equality, changing harmful gender norms, empowering women's and men's equal engagement in care work shouldn't be compartmentalized in terms of the project work. That's one of the learnings for us. And so it's not a project or work that we do out there. That is how denial operates when we limit this issue to a specific geographic area, an issue, or an organization. And so what we've come to recognize is that as facilitators of this work, we also need to do our own work. And more important than the curriculum and the policies and projects that we implement is the people that do this work. And so we have embarked on this very exciting journey, creating safe spaces for conversations for different groups, to dialogue, to find camaraderie, to help and challenge the organization to be better, and to bring that change from within. And one of these groups that I wanted to talk about in this conversation is the Men at Save group that was spearheaded by a colleague and was triggered by triggered by the Me Too movement and the strong feeling that men want to help fight gender inequality, but many don't know how and where to start. And so we've created that space to cultivate space for men to internally reflect upon their experiences as men, their lived experiences of masculinity and manhood, and also their socialization growing up. It was a space where we fostered an opportunity for men to be vulnerable, tap into diverse expressions of emotions, and just move away from that binary that Gary spoke about earlier. We wanted to spark conversations about manhood, different versions of manhood and masculinity that transcended the group setting into work and personal environments. And we also try to bring men into a place where they can see how patriarchy, traditional gender norms impact their lives, both negatively and how they benefit from it. And so we were really hoping that by cultivating these spaces where men could talk about their own lives, their experiences, feelings, and emotions, we could create a platform that will have a ripple effect and enable broader change. Some of the really interesting outcomes or reflections from those groups were that men expressed a need for these spaces. This group was truly necessary. That's one of our participants said. They respectfully challenged each other, especially related to norms around who does care and care work in the home and the roles of men and women in the home. We were really pleased to see that those conversations really transcended that small space in the office and continued into their work and into personal settings as well. And so in closing, I think one of our biggest learnings from this work, both externally in our programs and within our organization, was that you can never talk people into the change, but you can certainly listen them into that change. And that movement building for a more equitable, more egalitarian world is the work of many people at different levels, more working together to make the world better. For us as gender equality advocates, recognition is that feminism is not something that we only are, but it's also something that we do in supporting that collective change from the inside of the organization out.
Thank you so much, Eva, for that very interesting experience that you have gone through at Save the Children. And I have to agree with you. There is no point in preaching out there if we don't change first our organizations, ourselves. So I think that's something we should systematically do, really. And you mentioned that this came out of the Me Too movement. Again, very inspiring to hear that women's movement have promoted this change at organizational level. And we know that's happened with many big international NGOs too, with the sexual harassment issues. So fantastic to see how women's movement can really be always at the forefront of change. Thanks for that. So I'm going to now pass over to Gary, who is going to continue with the other questions and the other panelists. Over to you.
Thanks, Angelica. Mara, I now get to turn the word to you. And very fitting that Oxfam is the last of our panelists to really tell us how to think about this at the macro and the structural level. Oxfam has led the We Care initiative for many years, a very important, putting your voice and resources behind how do we reduce and also look at redistributing the unpaid care weight on women and girls. So would love to hear some lessons and recommendations for that. And then very importantly, Oxfam launched at the beginning of the year, your Time to Care report, which really puts front and center how much women's time poverty is tied to global poverty and inequality. And I think affirming just how much this is not a separate standalone issue to talk about women's time poverty. It is at the heart of poverty and inequality globally. So tell us what you've learned from that, what recommendations come out. There's some great recommendations in the Time to Care report. Would love to hear you share some of those with the group. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Gary. Yes, in fact, this whole topic, unpaid care work and care work, we have put it like a central topic of Oxfam work on socioeconomic inequality and gender inequality. And the Time to Care report is a report that centralizes a lot of this work that has been done in programs in a number of countries, in Philippines, in Uganda, in Latin America, but as well from a number of perspectives. We wanted to look at the issue of care work with a feminist perspective that is intersectional, and that see how these inequalities intersect in women and men lives and intersect in communities and countries. The Time to Care report look at it, at this issue from a systemic view, and first put highlights that the voice of those with power and privilege tend to be reflected in social norms, in legislation, in tax systems, in language, in what type of jobs are better paid or no, and what types of priorities are measured and treasured by our macroeconomic systems, And this has serious implications also in care work. As it has been said by the panelists, we have globally, women do around 3 times more unpaid work than care work than men. But if we go, for example, to rural areas in low-income countries, it is women can do until 14 hours a day, and that is 5 times more than what men are doing. We see as well that the climate crisis is exacerbating this, because women have to go to fetch water for more time, longer, and this it affects agriculture and care work. It gets worse for, in particular, women in situation of most disadvantage and with different layers and intersections of vulnerabilities. No, we see as well that it is in these spaces that girls with more burden of domestic works are the ones that are penalized in the school system, and they have more rates of dropout. And we see as well that paid domestic work is very genderized. No, there are like 80% of domestic workers are women, and only 10% are covered by labor laws. And we see as well in the surveys about gender-based violence that women that do not fulfill their socially assigned role of care are more exposed to gender-based violence. No? And as well, carers, women who are doing unpaid work, they don't have a voice to influence the system. And there is the opposite, a political capture and influence of the wealthiest and corporations that are influencing over how we look at the economy, what we measure, what we don't measure, what are our priorities. In that, we see that we hear often that addressing unpaid care work is not a priority, and that in any case, it is not now doable because we don't have public money to address that, to address, for example, quality early care. But we see that regressive tax systems contribute to the lack of funding for a lot of work that is needed to reduce the unpaid care work that is done now mainly by women. We see as well the opposite, that there has been important tax breaks for billionaires and for corporations, and that affects as well what is the public money available to do these things. You know? The cuts in public spending are influencing in our education, health, and care systems, and are influencing as well, for example, the funding available to campaign and implement policies for gender justice and equality. That when there are cuts in public spending, in taxes, are very, very much affected. We saw, for example, in Brazil that in 2017, when there was a cut in public spending, it was the gender justice program was one of the most affected. No? And because of these systemic reasons, we have as well looked with attention at the issue, for example, of taxes. You know? When billionaires pay less tax rates than teachers, sometimes something is wrong. You know? The Oxfam Time to Care report has calculated that taxing an additional 0.5% of the world's richest 1% over the next 10 years is equal to the investment needed to create 117 million of jobs in education, health, care. No? Then there as well we see what are our priorities, and we have to expand the democracy and voice to decide what are those priorities, because the cuts in taxation to these groups of people exacerbate economic inequality and gender inequality. And the people most affected there are women and the poorest of the women. No? In recent years, we are seeing that these programs of tax cuts for billionaires are very popular and sometimes politically as well popular, but and a lot of the income is in public revenue relates to BIT that is very regressive, and that is affects again gender and economic inequality. Only globally, it is calculated that only 4% of the tax revenue comes from taxation of wealth. And this is very serious when we are saying that we need more funds to basic issues of living together. No? It is because of these systemic views in the time to care report and in the work that Oxfam is doing through the WeCare program and other programs, that we think that the response, it must be equally systemic, with recognition, of course, of unpaid care and domestic work, reduction through technologies, redistribution between men and women, but as well state and private sector, and as well having the representation at the decision tables of workers. We think this is very, very important. You know? Improve the situation of paid work, of paid domestic and care workers is as well very important to fight gender and economic inequalities at the heart of the issue that we are discussing. And then there we have, as I have said, to revise fair taxation systems and investment in public services, social protection, and gender justice. You know? And we have to challenge orthodox economic views that are very much centered on GDP and consider all these expenses in public services, for example, consumption, but not investment. No? Investment in national care systems and redistribution of Kate work is at the heart of an economy that is more human. No? And I would like to finalize by saying that a lot of times the unpaid work of women has been highlighted in development, saying that is a constraint by some development agencies, that is a constraint for women joining labor markets, and then they don't contribute to growth. What we think it is not that instrumental, that instrumental view is narrow, and what I think this discussion on care work, on gender and economic inequalities is not to make the lives of women to become more like the lives of men, but to give the possibility both to men and women to have their own income and to do as well care work. And we were hearing from some panelists that they in fact want to do it, and as well that both men and women have these options and free time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mar. And I think important really important that you brought up the issue of taxation and just how core that is to the world's equality and inequality. Also important that you brought up public spending. You brought up Brazil as an example of when budgets get tightened. Other countries we could mention as well. We know that things like paid childcare, we know that things like women's rights work, funding protective services for women survivors of violence, those are the things that get cut, while we don't see prison systems and our militaries getting cut. Thanks as well for linking it to violence. I think as we talk about social norms, it is, of course, how do we change them so that we engage men to do our share? But I think you acknowledging in some parts of the world for women to transgress the norms of what they're expected to do as care work can lead to violence from a male partner. And finally, I think you brought up an important point that the undue burden on women, the unequal burden on women of time use is also about voice. Do women have the voice they deserve in all public spaces because of what the unpaid care burden brings to them? So thank you for bringing up those important topics. We now have about 25 minutes for questions. I want to see, Fidel is back on the line. I want to see if we could allow him to continue his presentation. He was talking about the Bandabarejo groups that are going to scale now with the Ministry of Health in Rwanda. And let me see if Fidel, if we have a clear enough connection, would ask him to continue if he's able to. And then from there, we'll turn back to questions. Fidel, are you able to respond? Fidel, over to you if you're unmuted. I'm not sure if you've got a clear enough connection. Nope. Okay, I see him online, but anyway, we will, if Fidel's able to connect later, we'll bring him back. We've got 2 questions so far, but want to open up as well to, we show 70 participants online, open up to more questions. I'll field the first 2, or I'll read them and then ask different panelists to respond. The first question was around if there are specific moments in thinking about father training and our parent groups that we're talking about. Are there specific strategic moments to engage fathers? That was one of the questions that came up. The other question that came up, and I'll allow all of you to respond at the same time. The second question was around, do we engage female partners in those groups? And so I think if both, Yeva, if you could talk about somebody Save's work, and Tanjina talking about Plan's work on this, and I'll comment as well on both. The question around specific moments to engage fathers, I think our very simple response to that is that we're looking at opportunities where we can engage men. Where are men found? One of the places that we've been doing in Brazil and also in partnership with ROMREC is with the health system, and finding both in our State of the World's Fathers report, finding that prenatal visits are a place where lots of men go. We want to make sure that that visit and his presence there is desired by the female partner. She's the one who controls and gets to decide whether he's there. But when that is a mutual agreement and she wants him there, we've been working very much to engage the health system around expectant parents in particular. Unfortunately, Fidel didn't get to talk more about the efforts to engage Rwanda's Ministry of Health, but there's an agreement together with ROMREC to use the prenatal health visit as a recruitment point to actually scale up these national, to take to the national level parent training programs. And that relates to the second question, which is whether female partners are included. Certainly in Rwanda and our partnerships in Brazil and elsewhere, the Program P training is for both parents. It does a specific focus on engaging men to do our part of the caregiving, but it also includes in about half the sessions, the female partner or the couples are included together when that makes sense. So I wanted to touch on those very briefly, and now ask if Tanjina could comment on Plan's work and both the question of strategic moments to engage men and fathers, and also the work with female partners, and then to see if Yeva wanted to comment on that as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. So thank you for that, and thank you, Gary. Yeah, I agree with you. It's the most opportunistic moment actually is during the pregnancy. But it doesn't happen naturally, or it doesn't happen currently that father would accompany. In fact, before these training of fathers or fathers clubs and other sessions were held, men oftentimes do not accompany their wife. It's seen as a women's business, and often the health system is also not ready for the father or the partner or the spouse. So based on our work in various parts of the world, it took us a while even to get men involved, to say how important it is that he join. And of course, it's the woman's decision, but in most cases where the spouse or the father did accompany the woman to the health center, it was very much welcomed by the woman. She wanted that to happen. So another opportunistic time is during breastfeeding time. So pregnancy is one important time. And the second one is when the child is young, the baby is breastfeeding. We found that also during that time, there was an appreciation from the father and the spouse that he needs to help at household chores, and of course the non-violence, be less violent or non-violent. These were the times I would say are more opportunistic and help the entry point. But I agree with Gary, if the health system is not encouraging or is not ready to have father, that is a huge issue as well, because in many of the healthcare systems, the frontline workers, whether they're paramedics or health workers or nurses, majority of them are women, and again there are entrenched views about gender roles in the healthcare provider's mind as well. So it's not just talking about the men and the women in the community, but it's also the health system that requires gender transformation or be more gender responsive, and particularly be more responsive to having fathers and the spouses being there. And that change we were able to do in many of these countries, but it's again a slow process, and it goes back to the fact, does Ministry of Health have policies and procedures on how the health system would be more friendly towards men, especially during times of maternal and child care and under 5 care.
Yeah, but did you want to respond to either of those questions, either strategic moments or engaging women in the work as well?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I think from our work in this space, we know it's not just a women's issue or a men's issue. It's an issue of caregiving, and it's an issue of care work, and it's a human issue. And so so we can't just do it by engaging one part of the population, hoping to change gender norms that has been so entrenched. I think for our work, the curricula and the work that we've been doing to change gender norms is really focusing on childhood, because we know that gender inequality doesn't just magically appear when we graduate from high school and transition to adulthood. It starts from even before children are born. So when we try to fix it during adulthood, it's a bit too late. So how do we do that from the very beginning, when we work with parents, we work with teachers and children themselves to sort of course correct the gender norms that are starting to be ingrained from the get-go. And so for us, we see it as an incredible time for opportunity to intervene when it's still early. So with new parents, with young adolescents and children as well.
Hello. I think if there are more questions, comments, the colleagues from Promundo, can you read any more questions or comments in the system?
Sure. We've got a question which I think is a really good one and follows a lot on what Yeva was just talking about is, we've done some impact evaluation of these approaches of parent and father training. The question is, Has it proved more successful to work with fathers merely after they become fathers, or is it necessary to start earlier? Again, maybe I'll and go back to Tanjina and to Yeva. We can also comment on this as Sonke and Promundo of, yeah, what's possible before men or fathers and work with men who aren't biological or social fathers. Tanjina and Yeva, would you like to start? And then perhaps Angelica and myself can comment from the perspective of Promundo and Sonke. And Katya, you've also been looking, at the work in the workplace that you mentioned. So maybe you'd like to mention that as a place where men may or may not be hands-on caregivers, but we need to look at some attitude and behavior change.
Oh, thank you. I'll start. Thank you, Gary. It's a great question, and I think the person who asked hit on the root. It's the root of the issues. Fatherhood definitely is one approach. So Plan International has been working with young boys, and especially very young boys and young men, and it's called Champions of Change model. It's talking about toxic masculinity. It's about talking about non-aggressive behavior. So this program is currently being launched in many countries of the world, and I think as the NGOs who are working in this space, starting very early, and I think Katya, you mentioned that as well. We need to start very early, right, at the at the primary school level, whether they go to school or not, to discuss about the violent sexuality or talk about sexual norms and behavior. And this program is a series of sessions that accompanies the youth, and they have been very successful in reducing violence. But of course, it requires, again, I keep getting back that this is not just about boys and men. It involves the whole society and community, involving traditional leaders, community leaders, village elders, as well as in families, fathers, on role distribution of work and the non-violent behavior. It takes all of it. But yes, we do need to target early on, and it should start way early. And we have some successful programs on that. Thank you.
Yeva, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you. Yeah, similarly, we work, our work is really focused on very young adolescents and working with boys and girls in promoting gender equality. In terms of where is it better to start, I think I'll start where I can in any given context if we have the opportunity to do that. But I think what we have seen across our work and our programs is that youth often display more equitable, more egalitarian norms, and obviously easier to shape, but also opportunity for new parents to undergo these dialogues or transformative groups to be able to not just change the norms, but also practice the behaviors right away. So in our experience, we would like to start as early as possible to make biggest impact, but it doesn't mean that we won't engage that on the spectrum of ages and geographies.
Thanks. Katya, before you comment, if I may ask you to, I'm going to try to weave together a couple of questions. We've had two more, and I'd like to then hand over first to Katya and then to Mar. One of the questions that came to us was around policy in general. How do we keep pushing our governments on this? And maybe I'll add to that, thinking about national governments, but whether you or anyone else wants to comment on roles of provincial, state level, municipal level governments as well. And then a very important question about accountability. It was directed to Tanjina, but I think it's kind of for all of us as well. How is the work, whether it's the direct programming work with parent training and father training, but the work in general around care work and engaging men, how do we ensure that it's accountable to women and girls, while it's also talking about men's experiences with patriarchy and these rigid norms? So Katya, how about that question first to you, or those questions first to you and some comments, and then we'll turn it to Mar for some comments.
All right. Yep. I'm just kind of closing the questions here. So let me know if I didn't answer it, then I'll continue. So we spoke, or you asked about particularly the workplace. And of course, the whole discussion about the unpaid care work fits under the bigger umbrella of gender equality. And there's many elements in that. This is a very important element, a profound element in terms of the opportunities women get in terms of breaking gender norms, etc. But if we look at some of the other elements in gender equality, if we talk about the workplace, of course, there's leadership. If we really want to see this move, one, we got to get more women in leadership, but two, we also got to get the men who actually hold the power now to use that power for good, and to institute this. Be the voice, be the role model, go home and do your part, show how you do it, take your parental leave, or if you don't have kids, so you're over that, show and champion and role model the younger men who do that. This is a leadership issue, and it's in government and it's in private sector. And we got to get the right people to go in front of that. So yes, we need more women in leadership. Yes, we need the men in leadership to take this on. Two, it also links to, of course, the gender pay gap. Because, you know, if, and again and again and again, women are doing the things at home because they make less money, or they take the maternity leave and not the men take the parental leave because of money, we call it the maternity tax. You know, then we also have that element. So there was a question about what about men in the global, in a maybe more low-income place, a low-income country where men are seen as the breadwinners, so can't do that. So it is also about the fairness in the workplace. So we gotta work on multiple fronts. This is part of a much bigger paradigm. And then kind of just again, if I may say that role modeling, and that's something all of us need to do, both as civil society, but also as governments and private sector leaders, academics, but really show how it can be done, because this is not a theoretical discussion. This is a very concrete, how do we get the family life to function? How do we get the house to function? But that role modeling where we can show the good examples, develop the investment case, come with the arguments, use our voice and our influence, both financial and political influence. So that is just some of the many elements in it.
Mar, would you care to comment on the issues that came up both around how do we keep doing the policy advocacy on this, and also the accountability issue of how to ensure that this work is accountable to women and girls at the local level and beyond?
Thanks, Gabby. Yes, I would like to comment. Really very aligned with what Katya was saying. I think that we need to work at multiple levels, because here we are working about how we organize the labor market, about how we organize our families and our communities, about what are the priorities in our economic systems. And now I think that one of the first priorities to look at this issue is to challenge the hypertrophy in the economic discussion of orthodox views that count growth of GDP and not a lot of other well-being issues that are related to care work and are related to human lives. No? Now there are some examples of that. We know the example of Jacinda Ardern with the well-being budget. There are other examples as well at municipal levels. And I think to look into care work, we need to be systemic as well from that perspective. Of course, to fight harmful social norms, the stigma that men suffer when they engage in care work, to start early in the education system, to go through health policies that inviting men through the different stages of family life, pregnancy, etc. But I think that it is very important, and I will put emphasis as well in transforming our economic systems, and as well from the point of view of accountability, to measure more unpaid work that now is only partially measured and so only in some places, to develop more ways as well of showing what is the impact of sharing that unpaid work, and to really follow the inspiration of feminist economics that have been speaking about this issue for many decades now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mar. We've got, I'm conscious of time, so I want to make sure we're getting a few of the other questions here. I'd like to turn the next to Tangina, that since it's a topic that you brought up. Two participants asked about the issue of engaging women and mothers, acknowledging, and you brought this up in your reflections around that norms and resistance from women are sometimes getting in the way of men and boys doing more of the hands-on care work. Wonder if you could comment about that for a couple of minutes, and then see if, Angelica, we've got a couple of closing comments we want to make sure there's time for. I know there's even more questions, but two of the questions were about that. So Tangina, over to you on that point.
Thank you. Can I just close on one sentence on the accountability question that was very important? And I just wanted to say that PLAN has developed a Women and Genders Empowerment Index. So we have seen that where men are more engaged in household chores and sharing a workload with women, in those places we have seen improvement in the index level of empowerment for girls and women. So yes, there is an accountability tracking mechanism, and I just wanted to share that. Going back to your current question, Gary, about women themselves not welcoming, and it is true, and it is one of the main reasons we have seen at the household level where women themselves are not appreciative of the work or sharing the work. But it's and not just the woman herself, it's the elders in the home. So whether it's a mother-in-law or the grandmother or somebody of a decision-making stature in the household, oftentimes has not welcomed this. And that is why when we talk about male involvement or male engagement, it's not just about talking to men. It has to be talking to girls and women and the fathers and the men, and of course the community leaders and elders. So it's not one or the other, and I think others have mentioned it too. But you are right, it's a very common pattern, and to break these deep-rooted gender norms and attitudes, I think we need to work at different levels and with men and women at all different levels. Thank you.
Thanks. I think with looking at time, I'd like to give our panelists, those who would like to, just a kind of a 30-second wrap up. If there's a topic that you want to say, this is the one I think we need to move ahead on, among many others, of course, but just to very quickly go through in the order that you spoke, if you've got a 30-second wrap up, and then Angelica and myself will close. We've got a couple of other questions in there that we're going to try to include in our final comments to the extent that we can, but before that, wanted to turn over to the panelists to just a quick takeaway, a quick message you'd like to send us off with. Katya, you start?
Yep, I have a message, an ad, and a tweet. The message is, you know, achieving gender equality is not a woman's issue. It is a societal issue, and men and boys play such a key role. The unpaid care work, the work at home, we need to share it. The 50-50 men pledge is something we call on all of you to help champion. And the ad is, we have a really key moment this year. It is the generation equality. It's the 50th year of the Beijing conference and plan of action, and there's so much happening. We need jointly to make sure that it doesn't become kind of a women's undertaking, a women's meeting, but that everybody, both in the whole rich diversity and non-binary, but that everyone is involved, and that particularly the issue of men and boys involvement, both in leadership and using their power for the right thing, but also in terms of unpaid care of the work at home is championed here in the Action Coalition and in general. And then the tweet is, when you invest in gender equality, when everybody is engaged, everybody win, win, and win. Hashtag MenCare, hashtag Women Deliver.
All right, we sign on that. Tanzina, any final takeaway?
Just 2 seconds, yes. I think there's a lot of globally, finally, more discussion. It has been there, but more discussion about women's empowerment and gender transformation. I think it's not just about women, and I'm probably reinforcing what Katya said, which is good. It's about men and young boys, and it's not just about women. So the gender transformation cannot happen with just addressing or having programs and work with girls and women only. It has to include men and boys, and start very early with boys, because it starts at home, and children are learning about the gender norms, so very, very early on to change these norms. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeva, final thoughts to send us on our way?
Thank you. I want to echo what Katja said, that this is a human issue, and movement building and working together really starts from, is the work of many people that are working across geographies, across organizations, inside organizations, outside organizations, at all these different levels. And so just that we're in this together as a group that is really committed to gender equality, and really excited and encouraged to hear about what everyone is doing for a more equal world. Thank you.
Thank you. Mar, would you have any final takeaway?
Yes, thank you. I would like really to end by saying that unpaid domestic and care work is such a central issue in the world we live, and involving issues so profound that cause so much suffering as gender justice, economic inequality, race, migration status. We know that the poorest women a lot sell their care to other people and family, that if we get this right, it has really the potential to be revolutionary, and it's urgent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank all the panelists for your really thoughtful remarks on it. I think we could, there's even more questions. I'm very conscious of time, and want to make sure that Angelica can also do a sum up and some final comments. From Promundo's side, and in our role as MenCare, together with the other steering committee members, we want to reinforce one more time the 50-50 platform. Those of you who haven't memorized what the 5 elements are, we'll remind you. One is parental and family leave, and we want to make sure that it does say family. We are, of course, we care about the care for young children, but we very much understand the multiple ways that families and couples and individuals need to care for others around them. The growing burden of elder care is certainly one that we also acknowledge that's there. Access to paid childcare. There's no way this can be done, and that women's full economic participation can happen without that. Number 3, as we've heard from the panelists here, the importance and the effectiveness of well-done gender transformative and accountable to women and girls parent training. Fidel got cut off, unfortunately, but there's a real bright story to tell there of the connection with the Ministry of Health that has signed on to say, we want to make this a national program. 4th, and many of you talked about as well, and this is part of our platform, starting young. We know that girls do 40% more of the hands-on care when they're growing up. We've got to start younger with this. We have examples of how to do it. And 5, and Katya reminded us at the beginning, it's getting governments to count it. Count the inequality in unpaid care work, hold ourselves accountable to achieving equality. We've added a 6th one around poverty alleviation, how to connect this up to the social safety nets and cash transfer programs that in some countries reach up to 20–25% of households, and with that funding usually going to mothers. How can we use that as a lever to engage men in doing the care work? And I think it's also important, and I'll give one example of, it's easy in this moment of conservative backlash and conservative governments to think we're stuck. We've been part of some really important efforts here in the District of Columbia, this progressive island here in the US, of getting a family leave bill that comes into full effect of 8 weeks paid leave for multiple forms of caregiving, caring for elderly parents, caring for a spouse or partner, and caring for an adopted or a newborn biological child. And pushing back on the resistance from the corporate sector around that and engaging corporate sector as allies in it. So I offer that as an example to say, we have to look at the conservative backlash that's around us. We've got a huge effort to do, but we can also look locally for doing some of the change. On that, I'll say thank you and hand it over to Angelica for some final comments.
Thank you so much, Gary. And I want to comment on 2 things. There were some questions about how to involve extended families. And that's the reality of many families in the South, and also the reality of poverty and inequality. I'm thinking of South Africa. We work mostly with fathers who are going to be, fathers-to-be. But also our reality is that we have the legacy of apartheid, poverty, migration, absent fathers. We have a huge amount of families with absent fathers, you know. So I think that's something we need to also grapple with in the country. And I know it's also reality in other parts of the world. We need to start thinking about what to do there. So that's one thing. And I also wanted to say also on a more optimistic, kind of tone, there's a lot going on in the world right now, uprising. So I think there's a lot of social movements fighting neoliberal policies, extreme ones, which really go against the core of the things we are promoting. So my hope is that we engage in those spaces and we put the care economy at the center of that. So I think that's happening in Latin America, it's happening in other parts of the world. We have the obligation to really take this agenda into those spaces. So I hope we do it in our social movements at national level and internationally. And I hope we continue this conversation, hopefully in Mexico, maybe in Paris. I think we need to take this there. I think we have been talking about this in a group. Let's make it bigger. Let's take this conversation into those spaces and really make a reality the commitment that we are demanding from governments. So that's from my side. And thank you again to all the panelists and for the wealth of experience, and to the participants, I think, and we need to keep this conversation going. So that's all from my side. Thank you so much. And thanks for Promundo for coordinating this.
Thanks to you, Angelica, and to Sonke and all the MenCare partners for helping us organize this. And thanks to the participants who stayed until the end. We'll have it posted online as well for those who would like to repost it or see portions that they missed. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.